is not just to entertain an idea. What idea? The idea must produce in you this feeling, which is a sensation, but it must be a feeling. What would the feeling be like if it were true? You dwell upon that until you catch that feeling. As Churchill said, that the mood determines the fortunes of people, rather than the fortunes, the mood. The mood precedes the fortune. So what would you want in this world? Well, contemplate it. What would the feeling be like if you had it? What would it be like if it were true? You can do it. There is no flower in your hand, but you can feel the soft velvet feeling of a rose. You can smell a rose, though it's not physically present. Try it. Try all these things with the inner man. And when you can actually feel it, so that you raise your imagination to the point of sensation, to vision, then the whole thing is done. It's done in a way you do not know it's going to happen. So tonight you want a bigger job, you want more money in this world, you want, and you name it. Well, then it may be a thief who is going to aid you in the getting, without knowing he's doing it. Don't judge him, don't condemn him, just simply you go forward knowing that I have ways and means that the physical man knows not of. My ways, the inner man's ways, are past finding out. And you simply go forward in the assumption that you have already achieved what now is only a wish as far as the world is concerned. But you enter into the wish as though the wish is already fulfilled. So tonight is a practical night. Do you know this night what you want? Really what you want? Do what I did when I was locked out completely from marrying the girl I wanted to marry. I simply assumed that she slept there, I slept here, and I went sound to sleep, and in 1 week, my wife did an act which certainly I must forgive. In the eyes of the world, she is condemned for taking what she did not pay for. And yet, because of that act, I got my freedom. Then who is the culprit? Am I not? If there's any culprit, I am. If there is any culprit in this world, it is God. There is nothing but God. God is doing all in this world. He created everything in this world. And so if in me, he is the second man, and the second man is my imagination, and that is God. For man is all imagination, and God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself. Well, if I in my imagination slept as though I am happily married to a girl that the laws of New York State said I could never get because of my entanglement with my first wife, and in 1 week she performed an act which was judged harshly by society, and yet she was the instrument of my getting my freedom to marry the girl who now is the mother of my daughter. So how can I blame her who performed that act? She was in a state, and who did it? I did it. I did it by simply assuming that I was free and happily married to a girl that the state of New York said I could never marry because of the ancient laws that restricted my desire to get freedom in that state. So you forgive everyone in this world. They're all playing their part. So in my own case, I have seen thieves. I have seen all kinds of people play their part. They were instruments in the fulfillment of my desire. So how can I ever condemn all? So tonight you just simply boldly declare that you are the man, you are the woman that you want to be, and walk in that assumption as though it were true. And then let all these sleeping states play their part. May I tell you, in spite of what they appear to be, they are sound asleep. For God plays all the parts in the world. There is nothing but God. And say, I am, that's God. That is the Lord Jesus within you. That is your immortal being that cannot die. He cannot die. That is your eternal self when you say, I am. Imagination is not some vague essence. It is a body, a reality, an infinite body that is so perfect when it's awakened that in its presence everything is made perfect. But while it is awakened, it exercises that power and draws into its world everyone that can play the part for its fulfillment of its dream. So here, I hope you heard it clearly. I hope I've made it as clear as I can, because tonight should be a very practical night. That you will go out knowing who you are. You are a dual being. But the first man is of the dust, and to dust he returns. That is the man of earth. The second man is the Lord from heaven, and he cannot die. That's your own wonderful human imagination. It cannot die. But it sleeps. It sleeps embodied in this tomb. And one day it will awaken. As I've told you in the past, the symbolism of Scripture will surround you. It's perfect. It is true. Everything told you in Scripture as to his birth, you are going to experience. And then your imagination awakens. And you trust no one but it. Only this being within you do you really worship. My old friend taught me that lesson vividly back in 1933. There was a deep depression in this land. Many of you are too young to remember it, but I am almost now 67. I went through the deep depression back in New York City. I was a dancer, and who would pay a dancer when they couldn't eat? All the theaters were closed. I don't think more than 3 theaters out of 50 were open in Times Square. So who wanted the dancer? I would have danced for anything, for a meal. And no one wanted to pay a dancer. So what would I do? I wanted to go to my little island called Barbados. And I had no money. But when I said no money, I mean no money. Not just a little bit, but none. I said to my friend Abdullah, Ab, I would love to go to Barbados. He said to me, you are in Barbados. I said, I am in Barbados? He said, yes, you are now in Barbados. I didn't quite understand what he was telling me. I learned it afterwards. He was telling me that if I want something, I must now, at that moment that I want it, assume that I have it. I want to go to Barbados. I am in Barbados. So this night when I sleep in Barbados. How? In my imagination. And how do I know I'm there? Think of New York City, where physically I'm sleeping, and see it to my north, 2,000 miles, northwest of where I am in Barbados. Well, the months went by, and I didn't see any evidence I say to him, you know, Ab, if I don't make the next boat out, or no planes were flying, no commercial planes were flying in those days, I can't go to Barbados. He said to me, who said you are going to Barbados? You are in Barbados. We can't discuss how you're going to Barbados when you are already in Barbados. Then he walked straight to his room and slammed the door in my face, which was not an invitation to follow him. If you knew him, that's how he taught me. I am asleep as though I am in Barbados. And when I went to bed, though in New York City, I had assumed that I am actually in Barbados and see New York City not under me, but to the north of me, 2,000 miles. And I woke within 48 hours after that moment, and under my door was a letter from my brother Victor. And in that letter, he enclosed a small little draft, $50. He said, I have told the steamship company, the Furnace Whitty Company, to issue you a ticket and charge it to me. The $50 is simply if you want some little thing, like a suit of clothes. In those days, you could buy a suit for $12, a fairly decent suit. You could buy a pair of shoes for $3.50 or $4. But he said the $50 just for anything you may need to get aboard the ship. But sign the chits, I'll meet the ship and pay all expenses, and I will pay all the tips. So it's not for tips aboard the ship. I went down to the place and I told them what my letter said. I read my letter to them. They said, Mr. Goddard, we only have steerage from now on. But when we get to St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands, you may have first class because someone disembarks in St. Thomas. I accepted it. I went back to my friend Abdullah and I told him, Ab, it worked. I'm going on the 6th of December, but I have to go steerage until we hit St. Thomas and then we go first class to Barbados. You know what he said to me? He said, who is talking of going to Barbados? You have gone to Barbados and you went first class. Well, what are you going to do with a man like that? I went straight to the boat on the morning of the 6th, expecting I would go steerage to the Virgin Islands, when the man said to me, Mr. Goddard, we have a nice surprise for you. We had a cancellation, and so now you're going first class. He wasn't surprised. I wouldn't even call him to tell him, because he was not given that way. He was trying to teach me a lesson. You believe in God, believe in me also. Well, the one speaking is God. It's the God in you, your own wonderful human imagination. If you say, I believe in God, everyone here believes in God, but do you believe in your own wonderful human imagination as God? If the word God conveys the sense of an existent something outside of you, you have the wrong God. Because you are the temple of the living God, and the Spirit of God dwells in you. Well, if He is in me, find out who He is and where He is. Well, I have found Him to be my own wonderful human imagination. That's the God in me, is the God in you. And may I tell you, he cannot fail. He will not fail. But here on this level, we are the operant power when it comes to the law. When it comes to the promise, that is coming regardless of the life we live in this world. Whether I be rich or poor, be the judge or the one being judged, the murderer or the victim, regardless of what part I play in this world, the promise is not conditioned. It is unconditioned. God promised to redeem himself when he became man. So my fitness for the kingdom of God is not the condition when I make myself good. It is the consequence, not the condition of his choice when he called me into the kingdom. So let no one frighten you that you're doing things that's going to stop you from entering the kingdom. It is not conditioned by anything you do in this world. The only condition is on the law. I can say that if I go in a certain direction, I will not encounter certain things. If I dare to assume that I am what I want to be, and I am faithful to that assumption, it will come to pass. If I am not faithful to it, it will not come to pass. If I don't assume that I am it, it will not come to pass. So I am the operant power when it comes to the law. But when it comes to the promise, that is coming regardless of what you do or where you are or anything in this world. Everyone will be redeemed. But everyone. But here when it comes to the law, spend all your time while you are here, because the other is working, is coming. So while you are here, take the law and try to understand it and try to apply it wisely. Why not live well? Why not live graciously? Why not be a kind person, a generous person in the world? Why not be a gentleman? Why not be a lady? These are tremendous accomplishments for man and for woman in this world. So I say to everyone, while you are here, find out what the law is all about. Because you can't deceive yourself, because the law will not allow you to. As you reap the things in this world, you may deny that you planted them. But it couldn't happen by accident. So be not deceived, God is not mocked. For as a man sows, so shall he reap. And he's reaping everything morning, noon, and night. I may not remember my sowing and deny the harvest that is mine, but it's there and I've got to accept it. Let me now try to remember, when did I plant this? Maybe I can't bring it back. We have very short and faulty memories, and I can't quite remember when I planted that seed. Why, the morning's paper, as you read these horrible stories, would tell you when you planted it. You do not know the characters spoken of in the paper, yet you react. And that reaction was in itself the planting of the seed. You pass judgment on those that you read about. You read the gossip of the paper and you're passing judgment. And all of your imaginary reactions are planting seeds. Instead of spending your wonderful time and investing it by, say, reading the Bible or reading a poem, read something that is altogether lovely, you spend our time on the paper or the radio bulletin or the TV. And all day long we're simply putting into our mind ideas that must come to harvest. And when they come, we deny that we planted them. But here, on this principle of the law, you can be what you want to be in this world. I don't care what the world will tell you. You can start from scratch. And if you dare to assume that you are wanted in this world, you will be wanted. I am not a member of any club in the land. And yet, here I am an American citizen today by adoption. And yet, wonderful men and women in this land have never been allowed to enter certain clubs. I'm speaking of clubs I know well back in New York City. And yet, I, a stranger, have gone as an honored guest to almost every one of them. Because I never barred myself. It never occurred to me that I didn't have all the qualifications to enter as a guest. I have no desire to become a member. None. Yet I have gone to all of these clubs as a guest of those who were members. They came to my meeting and asked me for dinner, and they took me to the club, or asked me for some other purpose to go to the club. So not a thing in me allowed me to be barred, because I didn't bar myself. You can go any place in this world if you don't put these barriers on yourself. It's entirely up to you. God in you is your own wonderful being called your human imagination. In the 4 weeks that I'm gone, practice it morning, noon, and night. And long before the 4 weeks, you should show the fruit. I'm serious about it. You should bear the fruit of planting now. Not everything takes a month. Not everything takes a year to grow. Some things come up overnight. And you can plant it now, this very moment, by daring to believe that you are what at the moment reason denies and your senses deny. And actually feeling. Give it the tones of reality. And then drop it. You don't pick it up tomorrow morning to see if it's growing. You accept it. And in its own good time, it comes to fruition in your world. That is the law. So suspend them just for a moment and try this technique. What would the feeling be like? How would I feel if it were true that I am already the man that I would like to be? And if I am, how would I see my friends and how would they see me? It's all within us. So let my wonderful human imagination see them as they would have to see me if it were true. Bring them into my mind's eye and let them see me. And let them talk to me. And let them congratulate me on my good fortune. And don't duck. Accept the congratulations of your friends. If they really mean it. Actually play the part all within yourself. And then believe it 100%. As we are told in John's letter, the 5th chapter of his first epistle. If we believe that he hears us, in all that we ask of him, then we know that we have obtained the request made of him. Well, if you get the right God, you have no doubts in your mind as to whether he heard you or not, for you know you heard it, and that's God. But if you're not quite sure that he heard it, because there are 3 billion talking to him, begging, well, then you may be not quite sure that he heard you. Maybe you don't think you're good enough, but you can't deny that you hear your own mind. You hear your own inner conversation. You hear your own inner speech. Well, if you know that one is God, well, then you are sure he heard you. Now you are told in that 5th chapter, the 15th verse of 1st Epistle of John, if we know that he hears us in all that we ask of him, then we know that we have already obtained the request made of him. Well, all right. There's an interval between that imaginal act and its fulfillment, as there is between the creative act of a man and the birth of that child. Every little thing has an interval of time between the act and its fulfillment. A horse will take 12 months. A woman takes 9 months. The little sheep will take 5 months. A chicken will take 21 days. There are intervals of time. So the Bible teaches every vision has its own appointed hour. It ripens. It will flower. If it be late, then wait, for it is sure, and it will not be late. Different intervals of time. So it may take me a longer time. In this case with this man, 2 months to bring back 4,000 who were unemployed. To put his mind at rest that he doesn't have now to feel that he's going to be fired. He can put in now the extra time. Only a little while, 3 years and 2 months will complete his 30 years with Jones and Lachlan. And then what's a man of his age? 6 more years and then Social Security. So he'd have both. If it happened now, he wouldn't have it. He would be cut on Social Security and he would be let out without a good retirement fund. So she goes back and she reminds him that it happened before. He couldn't afford the roof for the house. And she said, I will see the roof on the house. I remember when it needed a roof. And so she simply remembered, she told him, I recall telling you, I remember when he needed it. Well, soon after something happened in his work, he got the money and the roof is on. The wife wanted an organ, couldn't afford the organ. All right, she said, I remember when you didn't have one. She has the organ. And she took one after the other. Of all these things, he's still, with all the evidence in the world, he is still working on some outside God. He thinks he's doing the wrong thing. He feels that if perchance that man is simply a devil incarnate, and he's taken me from my real God, which means something external to himself that he fashions out of his own mind and fashions with his hand, because all these little nonsenses that we buy and stick them up as holy objects. First of all, no artist really ever designed them. It's an offense to speak of an artist when you see these horrible monstrosities that we buy and stick around the place and call them religious objects. So, find who he is. He is the living God. He is not a dead God. You want to read the 115th Psalm about the kind of gods that men worship. The whole psalm is devoted to the false god that the whole vast world worships. He has eyes, but he sees not. Ears, and he hears not. Feet, and he walks not. Hands, and he touches not. Just a dead thing made by human hands, when the living God is within man as his own wonderful human imagination. So I tell you that all that you behold, though it appears without, it is within, in your own wonderful human imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. All things exist in the human imagination. And everything you see as an objective reality was produced by imagining. Think of one thing, just think of one thing that would simply deny it. You can't think of one thing. So you go to the moon. You first had to imagine it. Had to imagine everything concerning the machine that took you to the moon. Everything in the world first has to be imagined and then executed. All right. The intelligence to do it will come, but you take the blueprint first and conceive it and dwell in it as though it were true. And no power on earth can stop it from becoming so. Your visions will clarify itself. At night, it's a different kind of a night. Your days are different. You see people differently. You can't walk by any man and not see him God incarnate. Can't do it. Even if he has the most horrible background. And he said simply, well, a murderer. And it's proven that he is. You still see God incarnate. But so sound asleep, the poor thing doesn't know. If you could only just get to it and show him that he really is God incarnate. And the one he thought he killed, he has been restored to life. Not to the senses of man, but he is restored in a world just like this, terrestrial just like this. About his business, he continues his work until he too awakens from this dream of life. But all will awaken eventually. But why not start now? Start now to tell man who he really is. God and man are one. Man is all imagination, and God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself. Nothing but God in the universe. All God. And eventually, you and I will awake. And because God is one, not two, you and I are one. Without loss of identity. That's one of the strangest mysteries in the world. Without loss of identity, we are one. I know that from my own personal experience. We are one. And yet, I am individualized. And you are individualized. And we tend forever and forever toward ever greater and greater individualization. And yet, we are one. And I will bring that out to the best of my ability as we proceed with these series of lectures. You will hear it. But tonight, if you're here for the first time and you want something practical, you apply what I've told you. First, have an objective. You must have an objective. You can't say, well, I don't know what I want. Well, all right. Come back the next time. Ask yourself, what would I like of life? Don't be ashamed to name it, what would I like of life? Well then, try to get some objective. Now, prayer, as far as I'm concerned, is nothing more than the subjective appropriation of the objective hope. That is the way to success. I appropriate it subjectively. How do I appropriate a state subjectively? Well, suppose now, this very moment, I wanted a ball, an ordinary baseball. But there isn't a baseball in the room, all right? But I want one. I would actually assume that I am holding a baseball in my hand until I can feel it. You think you can't feel it? Well, now try it. Try to feel what it would be like if you held a baseball. Now, to prove that you have held it, see what it feels like, the difference now, a tennis ball. See any difference? All right, a golf ball. See any difference? A piece of silk. You feel any difference? If you can distinguish between these many objects, though they are subjective, then they must exist somewhere. If you can actually separate them in your mind's eye and distinguish between these objects, I can begin to feel, begin to sense, begin to smell a rose. Well, a rose doesn't smell or doesn't actually have the odor of another flower. I can detect the rose. Now a lily, an Easter lily. I can detect that. Well, what does it do? Well, I'm going to get them. Someone will think of Neville and send him a flower. And it's going to be the flower that I'm going to actually feel and touch and smell. It works that way. Money has an odor. It's unlike any odor in the world. It's more fragrant to the miser than the most marvelous perfume in the world. He can tell it. You put a money bag to his face, and it's like putting roses to mine. He loves it. He can smell money. He can feel it. Money has a distinct feel about it. Put a $20 bill in your hand and ask you to feel it, and then put another piece of paper in your hand, and you can tell the difference. There's a difference. It is an odor to it. All this is part of the inner man, that all things are possible to him. Try it. Before you condemn it, try it. And if you have the evidence to support my claim, well, then it doesn't matter what the world will tell you. If he laughs at you, so what? So they laughed at everyone who had an idea that seemed a little bit off-center. Always laughed at him. They laughed at the idea of going to the moon. Well, now it's an accomplished fact. There are still those who won't believe it happened, you know, because they don't want to believe that it ever happened. There are those who said you couldn't go down and actually live underwater. Now we have a submarine. There are still those who won't believe it. You can present them with all the facts in the world, and they won't believe it. So I tell you, you try it first. And if it proves itself in performance, it doesn't really matter what the whole vast world thinks. Go about your Father's business, which is yourself, and then live a full and wonderful life in this world of Caesar. And the day will come you will actually depart this world. I mean this age. Because those who are departing it now, unless they are awakened, they still find themselves in a world just like this. But those who have awakened, who have experienced the second birth, the birth from above, find themselves in an entirely different age, where they're all imagination. And they are perfect. And wherever they go, everything is perfect. They don't have to raise a finger to make anything perfect, because they're perfect. All things must conform to them, for they're perfect. That's heaven. So heaven is not an area, it's not a realm, it's a body. And when that body is awakened within you, which is the wonderful human imagination completely awake, then wherever you go clothed in that body that is completely awake, everything is perfect. If you found yourself in a forest of dead trees, they'd all burst into foliage. In the desert, they would all bloom like the rose. Because you are there. No blind man, deaf man, no handicapped man could stand in your presence. He would be instantly transformed into a perfect man because you are perfect. That's heaven. It's harmony. So it's not a place where you're going to go, pearly streets and all that nonsense. No. It's just simply you in a world that is perfect because you are perfect. And the day will come you will awaken that body where it's in you now. That body is in you, but it's sound asleep. And one day you will experience the resurrection. And you'll know the mystery of the resurrection. When you rise, and you rise within yourself. For the grave in which Christ is buried, as the Lord is buried, is your own skull. That's where he is buried. And in that tomb where he is buried, one day he will awake and he will come out of that tomb. And it's you who comes out of the tomb. And you'll know who you are. He is buried in every child in the world, this universal being, and yet one. Billions of us, and yet only one Lord. And that one Lord, in his fullness, is buried in you, individually. And when you awaken, you are he. So tonight, take a go. Make it a lovely go. Either for yourself or for another. For any time that you exercise your imagination lovingly on behalf of another, you're mediating God to that other. So, bring a friend before your mind's eye. Represent him to yourself as the man or the woman that you would like them to be. And don't tell them, ask for no praise, just assume that they're talking to you and telling you the most marvelous news about themselves. And you congratulate them on that good news. And go your own way. Believe in the reality of that imaginal act. It may happen tomorrow. It may happen the day after, or a week later, or a month later. It has its own appointed hour, and it is ripening, and it's going to flower. So don't be concerned. Leave it alone. And it will come to pass. So this is what I mean by feeling is the secret. I catch the mood, the feeling that would be mine if I were what I want to be. I don't have to touch something. I can if I want to. But it's the mood I'm speaking of. What would the feeling be like if she were well? If she were this? And then you catch it, just as though it is true. You always go to the end, and the end is where you begin. We're always imagining ahead of our evidence. So go to the end, and feel the end. And then dwell in that end, even though reason denies it, and your senses deny it. You turn your back upon the doubters. That is your senses, and what reason dictates. That's the hell, or the devil, or Satan in the world. That's the doubter. So you turn your back upon it. And then you walk as though things were as you want them to be. And living in that assumption, it slowly hardens into fact. Even though at the moment of the assumption it was denied by reason, an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. So you learn to assume and learn to persist in the assumption, and it will come to pass. It's all about the kingdom of heaven. And first of all, let us say the kingdom of heaven is simply that state into which man rises, where everything is completely subject to his imaginative power. He is destined to be an heir, one with his Father who is God, where everything is put under his power. Now, here is a quote from this 13th of Matthew. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. It is my hope that I can bring you to that pearl tonight. You may not value it to the point where you're willing to sell all that you have to buy it. But I will tell you of this pearl. Very few are willing to sell all and buy the pearl. But that we now quote from another passage of the Gospels, the 11th chapter of the book of Luke, the 21st through the 23rd. When a strong man, fully armed, guards his own palace, his goods are in peace. But when one stronger than he assails him and overcomes him, he takes from him the armor in which he trusted,
and divides his spoil. The very next line, as though it's an afterthought, throws all the light in the world upon that statement. He who is not with me is against me. There is no benevolent neutrality, none whatsoever. He who is not with me is my enemy. He is against me. So we find the one who is completely in control of this kingdom of heaven. And I tell you, that being is called in Scripture Christ. But Christ is defined as the power and the wisdom of God. In the first chapter of the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, Christ is the power and the wisdom of God. Don't look for a man. A man is only the instrument through which this power and this wisdom is exercised. But Christ himself is the power and the wisdom of God. You and I are the instruments through which this power and this wisdom is exercised. So Paul makes the statement, from now on, we will regard no one from the human point of view. Even though we once regarded Christ from the human point of view, we regard him so no longer. You're taking notes? That's his second letter to the Corinthians, the 5th chapter, the 16th verse. From now on, we regard no one from the human point of view. Even though we once regarded Christ from the human point of view, we regard him thus no longer. And then he, the author of that statement, defines Christ for us. Christ is the power and the wisdom of God. Now we are told, by him all things were made. And without him was not anything made that was made, but nothing. And so we invite you now to test Christ in you. Again from the letters of Paul, the 13th chapter, the 5th verse. In fact, read it through to the 7th verse. But I'll quote you the 5th. Examine yourselves to see whether you are holding to the faith. Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in thee? Unless, of course, you fail to meet the test. I hope you will discover that we have not failed. And then he gives us a warning, for now he's speaking only of power. Power and wisdom, personified in the form of one called Christ, Jesus. And now he warns us. I hope, and I'll pray to God, that you do not use it in the wrong way. Even if you think, he's implying now, that I have not used it to the full of my knowledge, I'd rather that you hear and feel that I have made a mistake or I have failed than that you use it evilly. Implying, stating quite openly, you can misuse power. Everyone in the world is using this only power, but they don't know it. So he's trying to bring us to the knowledge of this power and the wise use of it. It's called, as we first quoted it, it's called the pearl of great price. So great is this pearl, so valuable, it takes everything that you own to buy it. Now, you don't go and liquidate your stocks and bonds. You don't sell your homes. You don't sell anything in the world of stuff. But it takes everything that you now believe in, other than it, to pay for it. You believe in astrology? You've got to sell it. You believe in numerology, in teacup leaves, in numerology, in all these things. No matter what you believe in as a power to control you, you've got to sell it. It takes the belief, all these beliefs, and you've got to sell them. No one's going to buy them from you. But you give them up as valueless. Therefore, there's no price attached, no value whatsoever. But you can't hold on to one thing you now believe in as a power that controls your life and still hope to buy the pearl of great price. Everything you now believe in, whether it be even the drugs that you take, even the things, the diets, if you're a vegetarian, you think that's the way to God. If you're a meat eater, you think that's the way to God. If you are a non-smoker, non-drinker, that's the way to God. Or if you are a smoker and a drinker, and that's the way to God. There is no way to God but Christ. I am the way. There is no other way. Way to what? To everything in this world, but especially to the Father. No one comes unto the Father but by me. And here he defines it, that he is the only way in the world to everything in this world that you and I see. And it takes everything that we own as to beliefs that we think are powers to guide our life to pay for that pearl of great price. If you think for one moment you can hold on to one little thing, in the event this doesn't work, you can't buy the pearl. And so when I buy the pearl, I go all out and live by it. And there is no other being in the world, just this pearl. And I live by it. And this pearl is your own wonderful human imagination. That's Christ. Now I see her in the audience tonight. Last Friday night, this sweet lady told me this story. She went into the baker to buy the usual things that we buy when we go to a bakery. And the lady who waited on her didn't look well. And she, without asking the reasons for her present appearance, in her own mind's eye, when she got home, she talked to her as though she stood before her physically. She didn't sit down, she didn't relax, didn't go into a trance, just brought her before her mind's eye and heard her say that she felt so well. And she complimented her on the way she looked. She looked so well. And this was a communion between two souls, how she looked so well. And she believed in the reality of her imaginal act. 1 week later, she goes back into the same bakery. And here is this lady, same lady, but radiant. So radiant, it prompted a response from this one. And she said, but you look so well. What has happened? Well, she said, this past week I inherited some money. I paid all of my bills. I paid everything that I owed in this world. And so I have no debts, and I have money. Now, this lady is totally unaware of the gift she received from the lady who is present here tonight. Totally unaware of it.
Thank you very much. Tonight's subject is the secret of imagining. That is really the secret of God. For God is man, and exists in us, and we in him. The eternal body of man is the imagination, and that is God himself. So when we speak of the secret of imagining, we are speaking of the secret of God. So I will use the terms tonight in the order in which they are described in Scripture.
The secret of imagining is the greatest of all problems, to the solution of which everyone should aspire. Now, these are the terms now that Paul uses in his description of Christ in his first letter to Corinthians. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme delight lies in the solution of this mystery. For Paul describes Christ as the power of God and the wisdom of God. And the book of Proverbs describes Christ, called the Messiah there, as the delight of God. So here the supreme power is the discovery of the great mystery of imagining. So tonight I hope I can add some light to this wonderful mystery, because if you find it, you will find the secret of God's creative activity. We are told of so many writers having experienced it. Take our late President Herbert Hoover. He said human history, its many forms of government, its revolutions, its wars, and in fact, the rise and fall of nations could be written in terms of the rise and fall of ideas implanted in the minds of men. Now here's a man speaking who sat in our highest office in this world. If you could only control the imaginations of men, but who can control it when that is God himself? You are free to imagine anything in this world, and no power in the world can stop it if you persist in that imaginal activity. But we are not disciplined, we are diverted. Propaganda controls the motion of our imaginal activity. You read the morning paper, you turn on the radio, you turn on TV, and you're diverted. If you could only imagine the state desired, go to the very end, and dwell in the end as though it were true, and remain faithful to the end in a way that no one knows, it would objectify itself in your world. For objective reality is solely produced through imagining. That is God himself. So when I speak of imagining, I am speaking of the creative power of God. I am speaking of Christ. That is the creative power of God. That is the wisdom of God. That is the delight of God. Man, not knowing that, he thinks in terms of a person, not knowing that he himself is the person in whom God dwells. And he has to discover God within himself. When he discovers God within himself, he's still a person. But he discovers God as his own wonderful human imagination. That is God. And he discovers, if he observes what he's doing, that all of his imaginal activities do eventually become objective facts. But man's memory is so faulty, he can't quite relate his own imaginal activities to the harvest that he sees in his world that he's compelled to reap. Here is a very so-called wise man, wise in the use of the English tongue. His books are almost in all the universities of the world. I know they're in almost all the English libraries of the world. He's gone from this world now. I knew him quite well. He was a sheer delight as a dinner companion. He changed his opinion in later years, yes. But back in the 30s when he wrote Ends and Means, this is what he said, and this is all the substance. He said, I had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning. Consequently, I assumed that it had none, and was able, without any difficulty, to find satisfying reasons for this assumption. He assumed it had none. But one night I came out of the Ebell Theater, having given my lecture there, and I looked into the hills of Hollywood, and here the whole hill is aflame. Houses, how many? I think there were 40, burned that night. One of the 40 was Aldous' home. In it he had these priceless manuscripts. He had manuscripts not published by D.H. Lawrence that were given to him by Lawrence. He had his own manuscripts and a priceless library, plus lovely pieces of art that members of his family had done. He had so many intellectual giants in his family tree, both on the male side and the female side. And he fell heir to so many lovely things, pieces of sculpture, paintings, and these wonderful manuscripts. Everything went right down to ash. Not one thing was saved but the suit on his back. So he had motives for not wanting the world to have a meaning. And he consequently assumed that it had none. And then he had no difficulty in finding satisfying reasons for this assumption. That was plenty, and then seemingly forgotten, but it was recorded in his book, written in the 30s, called Ends and Means. He went about his business, changing his opinions from time to time, but that had to come to fruition. So be not deceived, said Paul. For whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. Well, you sow with your imaginal activity. Whatever man is imagining, that is what he is sowing. And when the time is right for its fulfillment, it comes to pass. And all that he held so dear in the latter days of his life turned into ash. It had no meaning. The world had no meaning. To him, they were priceless then. And he intended to give them to one of our universities here on the West Coast, either USC or UCLA. Well, that's what he told me. And then the whole thing collapsed, and it all turned to ash. Our whole vast world is what we are imagining pushed out. And there's nothing but God, and God is your own wonderful human imagination. We are told in the book of John, he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world knew him not. He came to his own home, and his own people received him not. But to all who received him, and who believed in his name, he gave power to become sons of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Not a physical birth, not from the passion of blood and flesh, but of God. God is your own wonderful human imagination. That's where the birth takes place. From above, out of your own skull, out of your own wonderful human imagination. Now, Jeremiah, which name means Jehovah, will rise. In this passage, taken from the 18th chapter of Jeremiah, you will see that the Lord God Jehovah is your own wonderful human imagination. And the Lord said to me, and this is Jeremiah speaking in vision, and the Lord said unto me, arise, go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my word. So I went down to the potter's house, and there he was, working at his wheel. And the vessel made of clay was spoiled in his hand. So he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to do. Now the word translated potter in the concordance, the biblical concordance, is imagination.